Yeah, it feels really weird. I don't have to remember to unmute myself or anything. It's really weird. Yeah, hello. I'm Tom. I'm from Codemate. We do Flutter as well, and yeah, and we love it. And today, going to talk about Navigator 2.0, and yeah, why you might want it, because that's kind of the main question that I hear. Codemate, we do Flutter. Been doing it for 4 years. We got into it quite a long time ago. 13 projects so far. Moi is a big one in Finland that we've done for nearly 3 years, and I am really pleased to say that we were working with Google in the summer. We did some work on Flutter itself for Google itself, which still can't quite believe I can say that, but yeah. Woo! Yeah, so tonight, why do you need Navigator 2.0? This is the main question, that people have built a Flutter app and it works, and you press buttons and it goes to pages, and you go, okay, great, there's a new Navigator. What is this for? What problems does it solve? And yeah, where do you start with it? What's the deal here? But first, yeah, what's Navigator 1, the classic Navigator? So here is the example app for today's talk. It's kind of a Google Docs clone, but bad. So here is the homepage, and it has your documents there. And with the classic Flutter Navigator, we call Navigator of push, and we push a route. Boom! It goes onto the navigation stack, and here is our document. And this supports commenting, so you can comment, someone has commented, and then we can push a comment route. Okay, Ian doesn't like my app. Oh, well, okay. So there we go. We have a navigation stack, and you might go, okay, great, fine, we're done. We don't need anything else. And the main question is here, what is wrong with this? Why do we need anything else? And well, the answer is nothing. It's fine. It does exactly what you need. If it does everything that you need, stick with it. And yeah, and you can go, right, fine, bye. So yes, and if you just need to push pages on a tap, so user presses a button, you show a page, and then you need to pop them again, great. It does that. It's a great, clear, easy to use API. It works really well. And also, if you are just learning Flutter, stick with the classic Navigator. Don't go near this new stuff. Just stay with that. It's fine. You can upgrade later if you hit the limitations of it. So what are the limitations? Why would we need to use something else? Well, what if those 3 different pages we have there, what if you wanted to push them all onto the navigation stack at the same time? But why would you want to do that? That's the first question. Number 1, deep linking, push notification. So you get a push notification and you want to jump straight to the comment page. And you clearly want that navigation stack in place. So if the user presses the back button, they get back to the document and they are familiar with that structure and where everything is. The other big one, Flutter Web. URL, you want to reconstruct that stack of pages. There are a couple of other reasons, things like state restoration if your app is killed in the background. Also, say if like a user was logged out and you wanted to get back to exactly where they were in the app, that kind of thing. But yeah, this isn't easy to do with that classic Navigator, with the kind of dot push. You end up needing hacks. You end up needing kind of workarounds, maybe other packages, doing weird stuff. It just doesn't really support it. So how would you want to do this? Well, you'd want something like this, right? You'd want to have a list of pages and go, right, here we go, put these on the screen. And yep, that's exactly what Navigator 2 does. This isn't quite the code, but just simplified it. That you have a Navigator object, a widget, and you can provide a list of pages. So here, the comment page would be the actual visible page. And if you went back, then the document page would show, and went back again, the home page would show. So That seems great, right? And nice and simple. Really nice and simple. No problems at all. And the Navigator 2 API allows you to do all of this, and it does the URL stuff, and it lets you do back and forward buttons, URLs in web browsers. But it's a bit too flexible, and that's a problem because it is very kind of low level. Flutter in general is very good at kind of hiding complexity from you and not having to go into those kind of platform specific things, that kind of thing. It's very good at kind of guiding you and being opinionated and not giving you lots of different options. However, yeah, there's a bit of a but here. This is the architecture diagram from, don't worry about the actual bits of this, but yeah, it's quite complicated. This is what you need to implement if you are going with the actual API. There's a lot. And deep breath. Let's go through what you need to implement in order to, if you're just using this API straight, what you need to do. So number one, we define a set of path objects to represent the different pages in the app. Then we need to define an app state object to define the current state of the app's navigation to notify the router when the state changes and the navigation needs updating. Then in our build method, we use a state object to determine which pages are on the navigation stack using a load of if statements. And then to implement URLs for the web and deep linking, we have to implement a method which returns one of the path objects from earlier based on the current state. Then we have to implement another method which, based on that path that we last returned, returns the actual URL string to show in the address bar. And then, in order to go back the other way from a browser URL to the correct stack of pages, we need to implement a function which passes the incoming URL and then returns another path object. And then we need to another method, which one we're on? Yes, which takes the path objects, updates a global app state object from step 2, which then notifies listeners, rebuilds the navigator from the correct pages, and hopefully you've done it already. It works. All good? Done. Oh, and then you need to implement a pop method because then you need to manually pop the navigator because you need to manage that stack as well. But then you go, oh no, then we have a nested navigator. So we need to do another pop method. Yeah. This was from Google's example of when Navigator 2 was first announced, of how to do things.
And nobody understood it.
Yeah. And basically, here's what happens. You get lost and you have no idea what is going on. It is too much stuff. And to be fair, the Flutter team know this. They said this. They were like, okay, we know it's a bit too low level. And yeah, hey. And what does all this code do? What is this sample app? Well, it shows a list of 3 books. It shows a details view of those books, and then it shows a settings page, and that's it. All that code for this. It's pretty fair to say that this doesn't scale to a full app. If you are building a full web, desktop, or mobile app with lots of different pages, yeah, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So, Flutter communities to the rescue. Routing packages. Lots of them. Yeah. Here's the thing. Router packages are the new state management. We were talking about the different state management options earlier. There are probably thousands of them by now. And we're increasingly heading that way with router packages. And the reason I say that they're like state management is because just like state managers, they do the same thing. They take a path and they spit out some pages. And they all do exactly that in slightly different ways. And here's a lovely chart made by a very lovely man, because he's sitting just there, Mike, of all the current routing packages that you've been able to dig out, at least on pub.dev.
It wasn't like a scorecard at first. Now a little bit per scorecard when I started sort of ranking them also a little bit based on some numbers there. So it became pretty interesting.
So, yeah. So, okay, now we have a new problem. Help. Pick one.
There is only one with a solid glue.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But then, hey, Flutter team to the rescue, because in the summer they said, great, okay, we see the problem here. We've made something that's maybe a bit too low level, but the community's coming along. So they did a usability study on I think it was 5 of the packages. And so they were like, great, don't worry, everyone. We'll come along and solve this. We will pick one of these and we will tell you exactly which one to use, except, oh, they didn't. They said it's too close because frankly, it is. They all do the same thing. It would be a bit like them recommending one state management. Like war would break out amongst the Flutter world, frankly. So, yes. But having said that, this usability study is really good. I really recommend reading it. It's on this GitHub URL. It's really interesting. It's interesting the methodology behind it, that they get developers and get them to try the APIs and things. So, yeah, I'm not wanting to criticize the Flutter team here. They did a really, really good job of testing these different routers. But yeah, how do you choose? What do you do? You've got all these options. Well, okay, let's get rid of the ones which are the old Navigator, because not all of these are Navigator 2. And let's go for the top 5. Here we go. And as I say, these all do the job. Any of them work. All of them work. Auto root uses code generation. If you like code generation, I hate it. But if you like it, great, use it.
Auto root has also been along for a very long
yes,
time. It was a Navigator 1 package
yes.
originally. And
yep.
it evolved into a Navigator 2 package. The other ones on this list are all sort of starting from Navigator 2 that you have on the outer as a history of one.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very mature, like Mike says. Beamer, very flexible, the different ways you can do like the routing. Go Router is the new kid on the block from Chris Sells and the Flutter team, which has a very simple API. It's very easy to use, I'd say. vRouter has lots of composability of like being able to put different things together.
It's
and
inspired by Vue router.
Yes, exactly. Yes, so that if you're coming from Vue, then great. And then there's Routemaster, which is by far the best one. It has no bugs. It has all the features. Use that one. But yeah, I wrote it, so I would say. Yeah. And no, I'm joking, because they all do the job. And you know, I think this is great that we have different people doing different approaches. They can take slightly different routes. And it's difficult to get this right. It's really difficult. I'll show you in a moment what one of the reasons it's so difficult. But I started Routemaster earlier this year because, and yes, I was going to say, Routemaster, this is why it's called that. I'm from the UK. This is the classic 60s London bus called a Routemaster, and naming things is hard, so it's called that after that. We had a particular need of some complicated routing stuff on Moi, our app, which we brought to the web. I started trying to implement the navigation stuff from Google's example. I started going mad after a week. I then was like, okay, I'm going to write a package. So I did. We had some particularly complicated things, particularly like when resizing the browser, because we needed to go from these bottom Cupertino tabs to the top tabs and keep all the navigation in sync. So there was complication there. I'm not going to go too deep into Routemaster today because, yeah, you can go and check it out for yourself. And all the other routing packages do pretty much the same thing, but let's have a look at 3 examples. I'm sure everyone, even if you haven't used Navigator 2, is kind of familiar with this kind of pattern of providing routes and mapping them to pages. Lots of web frameworks use the same kind of thing. This is how Routemaster does it. All the other packages do it very similarly. And then I've tried to make Routemaster very similar to the classic Navigator of got push, and you can replace. Then something else that I think particularly is good in Routemaster is things like nested navigation and tabs. This is the entire code that you need to set up the routing for tabs and a couple of pages, and then the build method for the home page of how to show it. So it's really simple, and Routemaster does a load of stuff for you with that, or it tries to at least. And then a third one is you can swap the navigation routes out at runtime. So for instance, you can have a logged out route map and a logged in route map, and this solves quite a few problems with preventing people accessing the logged in routes when they're logged out. So you can swap them based on the app state.
Really, because the logged in one doesn't even exist when you're not lived in.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you just can't access it. So it, but yeah, this is a challenge. This is a big challenge, particularly now that Flutter is on web and iOS and Android and desktop. They have different navigation styles, and particularly Android has been fun to work out how to support that. I did a Twitter poll of asking Android users what should happen in this situation. You open an app, it starts on tab 1, you go to tab 2 and you press back. 116 results, almost 50-50 of what people thought it should do. So trying to come up with sensible defaults for these platforms is an interesting challenge, shall we say.
And I found 5 different patterns of applications actually doing
yes,
that.
Exactly. Yeah, there's no one right way, no matter what anyone says. So yeah. Or in summary, you might not need any of this. If your navigator does your navigating, then stick with it and you're all good. But this should give you an idea of kind of the limitations of where you might hit. Learning the actual API might not be that useful. It might be useful if you want to go that low. And yeah, pick a routing package based on your preferences. I've made one, but all the others are really good. So yeah.
I would say pick one of the top 5 you saw on the list. But there are a few new ones, actually fresh ones that have pretty nice complete implementations and are well tested as well. They might get popular too.
Yeah.
I don't know. You don't need more than one.
Or use the default Navigator API from. I mean, you don't need the library.
You don't need a library, but you do need quite a lot of code. And yes, and but
talking about that, you wrote an excellent article series.
Yes, sorry, I should have added a link.
Your own solution.
I'm sure we can share that.
It was fun. It was 5 medium articles.
I think 12 people.
Not that that's a bit of a hint to the complexity or anything. It took 12 articles.
The main problem here is that when this was announced, that was not tutorial.
Yes.
You had to really read the source code to understand what's going on. And nobody wanted to read the source code. Nobody started using this.
Yes.
And I think if the approach was different in the beginning, then things would have been much different for Navigator 2 API. Because I think it does the job. I think it has bugs, definitely it has bugs, which is fixed in next versions. But I think the API, the Navigator 2 API itself isn't that difficult. You read it so fast.
Did I? Sorry, I didn't notice. Sorry, I do rush sometimes.
There are a lot of parts in it that you have to sort of start understanding and comprehend before you can build anything with it. And that makes it sort of most devs are, I don't have time for this. I just want to get my pages on there and move on.
But what I really like is that it's because this Flutter architecture, there is this Flutter engine, and on top of that, there is this Flutter framework. So when you understand Navigator 2 API, you don't care about web or other things because they are built. It's built in that way. You just focus on Navigator 2 API, and the engine implementation is different for web and the other ones. So I like that part. I don't know how you handle that in your library. You need to understand the engine details, right?
Yeah. And to be fair, the API is a really good abstraction on those different platforms, and that's difficult. But yeah, it still does leave quite a lot for you to implement. And as I say, I don't think it's opinionated enough in how it does.
But if you are doing only mobile, just need to understand delegate.
Yes.
If you are doing web, then you need to understand parser.
Yes.
And you need to understand how it's communicated, the flow, like a sequence diagram.
Yes.
Yeah. If you are doing only mobile, then you can just use the Pages API. You don't have to use the node router constructor of your app even.
Absolutely. And that is actually a good point. That page is just the list. You can just use that without any of the rest of the stuff and any of the any routing package. And if that does enough for you, great.
It could be enough in some cases.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
and there are some of the packages listed there actually do that. They claim they are Navigator 2, but they just implement Pages. They don't implement Material Router. They don't use that API at all. So I had to separate them actually. One of the packages like that is one that Felix Angelo wrote. So he contacted me because he was upset when I didn't call his package. No, he wasn't upset. He just pointed out a valid point that there are sort of 3 classes. You can have 1, and you have the full 2, and you have, the partial tool implementation.
But also, like Navigator is a widget which has a stack inside.
Yes.
So when you are doing Flutter, you have widget tree. It's like having this Navigator tool with pages. It's like you are doing Flutter.
Yes.
So it's nice to build this entire structure as you said in the beginning. So that's why I like Flutter Navigator tool most.
About the Navigator package, the ones that I've used of these, I've already actually used Routemaster and Chris Sells Go Router a little bit of the ones mentioned there in some projects. So I would have to say they both have very nice APIs, and they are feel very Flutter-like when you use them. And Tom did an excellent job on making his feel very Flutter.
Thank you. Cool. Any other questions from anyone?
Yeah, I have a question.
Oh, cool.
So, like, I think as we all know, like all apps start simple.
Yes.
And then gets more complex and complex even like in ways you don't imagine. And part of the reason why we like using Flutter, for example, is that someday we might be able to have it like in web. So
yeah,
at least that's a possibility. Like it's not something that we might have in mind now, but do you have any advice on how like a route that we can use that is simple for now but scalable at the same time? So because we can use something simple now, but then when we have 20 different routes and different permissions, for example, and we need to have some logic for this navigation, and suddenly we want to go to web, then so do you have any insights in this area?
Well, two things. First of all, it's not actually that difficult to go from Navigator 1 to 2. I have done that on a project in the last few weeks. I've been adding Routemaster to a project, and it was not as difficult as I thought it would be. So yeah, it can actually be less code than you think. I think in general, all the routing packages pretty much are pretty good at starting off fairly simple and then being scalable. I would hope that Routemaster is pretty good at doing that. I've tried to do that. The API is getting bigger and bigger, and I'm a bit concerned about that, but I'm trying to kind of hide the complexity away. I think GoRoute is also a very good example of that, of where you can start very, very simple and build up. But yeah, I don't think it's really that big a bigger concern generally. But yeah,
I could add to that if you are starting with the Navigator 1, and if you do named routes in it and on general routes, set it up like that, and not just push everything on the with that, but you have that set up, then reusing that usually to any of these packages is actually commonly quite a good fit. Or even if you're going to start building your own with the raw API.
I have a question too. So when I was experimenting with Navigator 2, I was working on simple sample apps. So I never worked on a production. So that's what I'm saying. Okay, Navigator 2 API is really good. So yeah. Okay. Because
you have a lot of complex scenarios in your article.
Yes.
Yeah.
True. But one thing I want to mention is that Navigator 2 is based on app state changes and operating system events.
Yes.
So let's talk about this app state changes.
Yes.
And how do you define the app state in Navigator 2? One app state to rule entire application. Yes. So how do you do this state?
Yeah, I think using an app state object is nonsense.
Yes,
and this is the key thing of the complexity that I was talking about earlier. That the API and that example, it uses an object to define what is being shown. So like whether there is a selected book or not, whether the settings page is visible. And that might be kind of okay for that simple example. But what you end up with is you have that state object.
God object.
Yes, you have that God state object managing the navigation. And then you've got to write the code to pass URLs to then recreate that state object. And then you've also got to write the code back again to go from that state object to generate a URL. And it's like, hang on a second, haven't we already got a state object here? We've got a URL. So like, why don't we just use the URL to guide all of the state and power the state? And sure, there are some reasons you might not want to do that because it's not strongly typed, but you can do things to work around that. But in general, that's where I think that example is way overly complicated because it doesn't just use you end up with two sources of truth. You end up with the URL and you end up with the state object, and that's never good. So yeah. Does that answer?
I mean, I'm still not sure how to define in big, because suppose that you have a big team, it's a big app,
yes,
and you want to adjust one navigation.
Yes.
You need to understand the entire app
Yes.
to add one,
Yes.
because you need to see if I have this logic,
Yep.
it will affect the other logics
Yep.
as well.
Yep.
So you need to have understand the big picture.
Yep.
Everyone in the team needs to understand big navigation picture.
Yep.
At one simple navigation.
and it doesn't work.
I mean, how is it in your library? Do you fix that problem?
Because it just uses the URL. It just uses the path for everything.
Okay.
So
That's what GoRouter does
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, and all of these packages pretty much they go okay. So in the example of Routemaster, I think the other ones, like if you've got a path /1/2/3, it just goes from the end of the path. It goes right, okay, /3, that's page 3. Put that on the stack last, and then work backwards. Page 2, stick that beforehand. So it just goes from the URL to generate the pages from that, and the URL is the source of truth.
So you don't have that configuration.
No, the configuration is the route map that I
You
showed
make a
earlier.
route map,
Yeah.
and everybody has to maintain that route map. of
Yes.
course.
Now you got me. So.
Take a look at them. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're very
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
approaches.
Yeah, the thing is that, like, if you decide, okay, we want to do Navigator 2, it's very difficult to convince people in the app
Mhm.
how much time it will take.
Yep.
So, like, I mean, I don't have any experience to experience it actually in a real project.
Mhm. Yeah.
It takes time and courage.
Yes, it does. It does. Yeah.
There's one question for you in the chat.
Oh, hello. How complicated will Navigator 3.0 be? Yeah, I mean, I would hope maybe simpler. But yes, not sure. I'm hoping there'll be no other platforms with even more complicated navigation structures that come along. So yes.
By the way, is the name of Navigator 2 nowadays Router?
Router. Yes, I meant to say this earlier. That thank you. They referred to it as Navigator 2 during the development, and I keep doing that because I can't break the habit. But they call it now the Router or Routing API. Yeah. So.
Because that won't be Navigator 2.1, 2. It's not like a version.
No. It was just called that during development. So yeah.